Awesome. So great to have both of you here. I don't get to do these kind of panel type conversations as much anymore. So I really love the opportunity when I have multiple people on the show. How are you both doing today?
Doing great. It's great to see you.
Good to see you
Excited to
again.
be here on Slice of Healthcare.
And Jared, too, really appreciate this opportunity to chat with you.
Yeah, we're thrilled to have you. Let's kick the. So my initial questions will be to you, and then we'll kick it over to Denise in a little bit. But for those in our audience that maybe are unfamiliar, could you tell me more about OraLiva to kick things off and what issues you're working to solve?
OraLiva is a new diagnostic company that focuses on the early detection of cancers. And our first product is in the area of oral cavity cancer. Oral cavity cancer is one of the worst cancers that you can get. Unfortunately, a lot of cancers have developed their treatments in the last generation, and oral cavity cancer is left as one of the worst outcomes and one of the most expensive cancers to treat. So our company, OraLiva, is developing a tool that can go anywhere, a point of care device that basically captures cells and then with AI interprets these cells, delivering a complex thing that we call a cytosignature and relating that ultimately to the early capture of cancer in a way that has not been possible previously.
I just want to quickly add something because, when you talk about one of the worst types of cancer, um, I always applaud, Denise's organization for all the work they do for advocacy and for spreading the word about, what's happening in the oral health space. And now you're starting to see a lot of conferences, right? Like HLTH and Vive, they're starting to give more of a oral health focus, which makes total sense. Um, but it must be, from both of your worlds over the years, it must have been very frustrating to not have oral health talked about. It's getting there. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done. But I would love both of you just kind of to give your take, continuing on that topic, right? Why was it that we don't talk about this, or we haven't talked about, specifically what OraLiva, this type of cancer? Why is it not talked about, like oral health in general? And how are we getting past that? So maybe we'll kick it over to Denise and then we'll go back to you.
Sure. So you're right. It's interesting. The mouth is part of the body. People seem to forget that. Although, as you pointed out, it is becoming more known that there are connections between the mouth and the rest of the body. And when we think about the mouth being the gateway, causes of bacteria and inflammation and other chronic diseases, it's all connected. It's all part, of one healthcare system. Maybe not the healthcare system, but the health of your body. And we have made great strides in awareness. And I'd like to think that CareQuest Institute and Innovation Partners are part of kind of banging that drum and helping with that awareness. It has, in my 4+ years here with this organization, changed dramatically for the good. And so I do think the awareness is there. Investors are starting to pique their interest and realizing that there's opportunity, in the space. And I even think, traditional medical providers are realizing that it has to be part of the equation.
Just adding to that, I recently had on two leaders from Henry Schein One, and they were kind of talking about the whole, like the thing that you originally talked about, Denise, on the podcast, like the whole medical dental like integration and why it's so important. And kind of going back to OraLiva, so many types of cancer, early detection is everything, right? So would love to hear, continuing kind of, you were talking about this, and I want to give you more of a chance to both comment on this, but more about the AI's role in this cancer diagnostic solution that you put together. And specifically, what you're really looking for, how early should people be getting involved? Like, I'll leave it up to you, but I would love to hear that information, and we'll let you go back and forth. And then Denise, I have some more questions for you towards the middle to end of the conversation.
Sure. And Jared, it's a super opportunity for me basically to be here with Denise, and CareQuest's role in our recent successes cannot be understated. This has really been an acceleration, and this has been a huge challenge to bridge between dental and medical settings. And this is something that's come out of this program, is getting a more detailed understanding of why there are gaps. And oral cavity cancer, I think, is really a case in point for looking at these gaps, because it is a disease that naturally starts in the dental setting. It's in the oral cavity, and it's natural that it would be seen initially in that particular environment. But ultimately, when it goes to cancer, it becomes a medical problem, a medical treatment problem. And so there is a two different cultures, medical and dental cultures, that need to cooperate to establish a new standard of care in this particular space that represents a challenge. And this challenge doesn't exist in cervical cancer. We can come back to that later. But back to your original question about AI. What is the role? And this is a super hot topic, as you know, today, and a lot is going on in this space. And uh, there, for us, we had to develop a capacity to collect information on a relatively rare disease, oral cavity cancer. And in our particular case, we ran a international clinical study involving 4 sites with 1,000 patients, with a very special program funded by the NIH. It took us 4 years. We gathered 13 million cells. We ran into some complications. So this process is more complicated than collecting a cell and saying you understand that cell, and now you have a new diagnostic model. What we needed to do initially was get an agreement from pathologists as to what mild dysplasia was. And dysplasia is a term which defines precancer. So mild dysplasia is arguably the most important place to find this disease, so we can save lives, capture the disease. But in our study, we found that 70% of the best oral pathologists in the world disagreed on what that truth was. And that was a eye-opening event for us, and it pointed to the fact that we need to innovate, but we also need to agree on where the disease is. And this is a manifestation of how far behind this disease is, and one of our challenges to row up this stream. And ultimately, we developed a crowdsourcing strategy, basically taking a panel and having them come together to create an average diagnosis. That truth set became the basis for which we trained our artificial intelligence and machine learning. And so that was one of our biggest steps. And in these areas, it's more complicated than going to the internet and getting information to do the diagnosis. You need to do well qualified prospective clinical studies before you're in a position to have the gold standard information that can train the artificial intelligence, which we've now done.
And, you know, let's talk a little bit about how physicians and patients, like how are they able to access this technology? When you think through the test, is it covered by insurance today? Like, what does that look like? Would love to hear that. And then we're going to kick over some questions to Denise.
Sure. There are some gaps that with CareQuest and other partners that we hope to address here. But one of the striking things that we found in the SMILES program that we participated in, this dental incubator sponsored by CareQuest, is that dentists and and doctors have different reimbursement codes, different treatment codes, different procedure codes. And in the case of dentists, there are no dedicated codes for mild oral epithelial dysplasia. If you look at cervical cancer, and cervical cancer is arguably one of the most successful screening devices that our society has, but there's an agreement on where you capture the disease, CIN1, CIN2, CIN3, which is basically mild, moderate, severe dysplasia in the cervix. And then there's a series of treatment follow-ups that happen. So there is a standard of care. And in dental, again, we have this handoff that has to happen between dental and medical settings that uh, is being addressed now. But then there's also the need to develop a clinical workflow and a standard of care. So the other part that's complicated here is that there are different stakeholders on different degrees of expertise, beginning with the dental hygienist and the GP dentist that are frontline clinicians that are in a position to find this disease. And then there's their periodontist above that, and then the oral surgeon, the oral pathologist, and the oral medicine individuals, all with different levels of expertise. But what OraLiva needed to do with the help of AI is develop a intuitive platform to take this currency of cells. Uh, Cancer is a cellular dysregulation, so you need to understand the signals of cells to interpret the arrival of precancer and then ultimately cancer. And so what we innovated to do is to create basically what would be considered a thermometer for cancer. Over 100 different data fields coming together into one simple numerical index, like a fever. And are you above 98.6? And if yes, then refer. So we're making it that simple for GP dentists to decide if that 10% of the patients that has an oral lesion, whether or not they should refer up for more than.
I want to kick it over to Denise real quick. What was it about OraLiva that first kind of, you know, got on your radar, drew in your attention early on, and then when working with the team, what's continued to stand out?
Yeah, well, certainly as far as, selecting them to be part of last year's cohort, as we think about solving some of these challenges around, medical dental integration and solutions that can help bridge those care gaps, and help with early diagnosis and getting people the treatment they need, ultimately improving, hopefully saving lives, improving patient outcomes. OraLiva ticks all those boxes. Super exciting, passionate team, really committed. I've worked on this for a long time, as Dr. McDevitt said, but are now at this major inflection point of making it a reality. And so I think, it fits squarely in what we're trying to do, with our startups and entrepreneurs, and advance the innovation, and help solve these problems. We are super excited about the space generally. As Dr. McDevitt said, this is a huge problem, and way too often it is caught too late. And there are solutions, like OraLiva, and we have to figure out how to get the various stakeholders engaged, whether it's the medical payers, understanding, how we can save patients, reduce total cost of care, et cetera. And so it is bringing all those stakeholders to the table to talk about this. And that is what is super exciting to us, and why we do Smile, to kind of advance innovation and help solve real problems in our industry.
It's so frustrating when I have
I know
these,
it shouldn't be that hard.
but when I have these guests on and we have to talk to the insurance companies to tell, to inform them of why this is it. I know what you're doing is important within 30 seconds. Like, it's so interesting how we always need to like data on, well, do we think being able to test early and understand? Of course, yeah, of course. Like, it always amazes me any parts of like preventative care when insurance companies, right? Like, not to bash on insurance companies, right? Because
Mhm.
they do a lot of good, but there's also some questionable stuff as well, as we all know. Um, I would love to kind of hear, part of the frustration I think for all patients is continuing to not like when you think of just cancer in general, not just in oral health, there's very few that are not curable if they're caught early. They're, most cancers are curable, right, and with very limited side effects. And I think that's part of the pain for a lot of patients is access to these tests and things like that. So I love what this collaboration and what you're working on and what you're building. Just kind of want both of your takes on why does it still feel like we talk about all the time medical and dental just seem like there's still very little integration. um there was always with like dentists um and like just anything dental related, there seem to always be still like the stigma between the two, like between a medical doctor and someone that went to school for dentistry. I never understood it because you both are doctors, both are oral health is overall health, like it's the same. It's actually, if anything, there's so much we can have way more early detection, right, when it comes to what's happening in someone's mouth before it goes to the rest of the body. My question, this is a long-winded way of saying it, but like, why does it still feel like there's not as much integration as they should? The two should go hand in hand. We'll give both Denise, and then we'll kick it back to Dr. McDevitt. But just like if I give blood, why am I not giving blood in the same area as where my dentist is, or the oral surgeon? It just like, do you see a world where this is all going to be in one place at some point? Denise, and then Dr. McDevitt.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that's our vision of the future. And we know it's not tomorrow or next week, or probably next year, but there are major barriers to making that a reality. And they touch on a couple of things like the lack of interoperability between the systems. The types of codes. Typically dental codes do not have diagnosis codes, right? They're all procedure. And in many cases, dentists are reimbursed based on a fee for service basis. And so, the incentives, the payment models, the systems that don't necessarily talk to each other, those are all kind of barriers to making, this a reality and seamless. We believe it's not insurmountable over time. And there are folks, like you've mentioned, with some of the EHR systems, that are now integrating the medical side with the dental side, the coding, and there's still other things that need to be fixed. But I am a half glass full kind of person. I am optimistic. And like I said, I don't think it's going to happen tomorrow, but I do think we are on a path, and there are, a lot of folks aligned with CareQuest that are passionate about making this a reality. So, yeah, I think just some of the natural speed bumps that exist that don't make it easy. So I think ultimately it may be a little bit of a carrot or stick. And maybe there might need to be a stick. I'm not sure about this, the current administration and how that might play in to a stick, but I do think we are seeing progress.
Yeah, so let me just expand on that a little bit. I agree with what Denise says projected here. Going back to the area of oral lesion diagnostics, I think this is an area that is a natural bridge between dental and medical, and being one of the worst cancers that you can get and one of the most expensive. We know if we can convert one patient from where we normally diagnose them, which is stage 3, stage 4 malignancy, with a lesion size of 20 millimeters. So this is typical. It's not the worst. This is where it's diagnosed today. If we convert that to mild dysplasia, there's a potential to save $100,000. That saving of that kind of money provides a whole bunch of incentive to aggressively move into the kind of screening programs that have naturally existed in other areas like cervical cancer. So sometimes from the problem comes the opportunity. And in this particular case, there is a screaming need to bridge between dental and medical disciplines to deal with one of our worst cancers. And I think enterprise relationships, um, different payers and different providers and different suppliers who now bridge between dental and medical are in a position to play a catalyst. CareQuest is in a position to play a catalytic role here too. So this is primed to take off, and because there's been a problem in the past, doesn't mean that needs to sustain. You also see some indications for in vitro diagnostics, so clinical testing, which had been dominated in the medical area. There are more and more of these diagnostic tests that are moving into dental settings, initially not approved by all the payers, but there is now a willingness to move in that particular area. So, and I think the patients are becoming more and more educated, and so one of the things that we will work on next is educating the market, both on the dental and the medical side, as to how we can save lives in this space. And AI is just in a wonderful position to greatly enhance the diagnostic outcomes, and the industry will follow something that is a win for the patient, a win for the provider, and also a win for the payer. And this is a place where we see the capacity to do all three, and move in the next year aggressively into that particular area.
Yeah, and I just want to add on to that. I mean, as John mentioned earlier, it'd be amazing if this became the standard of care, right? We know that there's a lot of people that go to the dentist once or twice a year and don't see their primary care physician. There's other folks that see their primary care physician maybe annually for a physical, but never go to the dentist. And so it shouldn't matter where this happens, but wouldn't it be amazing if everyone was able to take this, have this diagnosis, do the test on an annual basis. We've talked about the pap smear and cervical cancer. Like, you're scratching your head, Jared. I know it. Like, why is this not just done, right? And that's what we're looking to make a reality, so that everyone can access that, and we can, make it just part of the process. Whether you're seeing your medical doctor or your dentist.
Yeah, you two are the experts in it. I'm just taking I really pull the frustration from patients all around, right? It's I wouldn't even call it scratching head. It's a head banging moment for a lot of people, right? Hitting their head off the desk, like, why is this? Now it is getting a lot better. I mean, it's even gotten better since the last time we had you on, Denise. Like, I think the biggest thing is we're talking about things a lot more now. And I know sometimes we always say, oh, it's just we're talking. That's the first step in order to truly move everything forward. And then, having these conversations is a continuation to that. And then we start to see more action along the way. I mean, insurance companies will need to get more involved as well. And I'm sure that'll happen. I have one more question for each of you before we wrap up here. We kick it over to Denise. So really, how do you envision the investment landscape evolving for oral health startups in 2025? And then I have a question for you, Dr. McDevitt, as a last question after that.
Yeah, so we've continued to see progress. As we know, investment in oral health is still a tiny, tiny, tiny part of investment in the total healthcare investment dollars, but it's not nothing. And so it was $400 million last year. That's not nothing. What's really interesting is even in the last year, the number of mainstream healthcare investors in the venture capital growth equity space that are now kind of interested in learning about the opportunities in investing in oral health has grown. We brought a number of new investor partners into our Smile program last year, and there are people now knocking on our door saying, heard about this cool thing, how do we get in? And so we can't have everybody, but we do want to make sure that the awareness is growing, through conversations like this and other publications that we're doing. I am bullish all across the various spectrums of oral health. And so whether it's on diagnostics, whether it's in other digital health, whether it's in, AI, all of it is coalescing around, prevention, early detection, and early treatment, which I think is great. And also aligned with, the systems that support not only the practices, but support, the system of care. And so, as we talked about, there's more players around the table, which is great. And I hope that in 2025, we'll see more total invested than last year in oral health.
All right, last question for Dr. McDevitt. Where do you see in 2025 and beyond OraLiva heading? What's next?
Yeah, so we are releasing our product in the summer of this year, and so being on the market and delivering initially into Delta Dental of Michigan's network, Michigan, Indiana, Ohio. We have a relationship there. We're also very keen in moving into mobile dentist and telemedicine, dental support organizations, and looking and helping with autoimmune disease. We have some special relationships evolving in federal qualified health centers, and we feel this ability to access the underserved populations is particularly important in some place that we can contribute, moving outside of the elite dental and medical centers. We're starting there now in collecting data, but those centers may treat 5% of the US population. The other 95% needs access to good quality care. AI is in a super interesting place to take non-expert providers and make them expert. I think that's what we've done through the last decade in running these large clinical studies. We've had to establish a new way to define the truth. We now have that. That's empowered AI. And we're in a position now to have that super expert advice come from a diagnostic test that is delivered eventually at point of care and impact all of the US population and saving lives and doing something I couldn't help both my parents. My both parents died of cancer, and so this is important for us to move in that particular direction of taking one of these deadly conditions. And
it's personal, right?
It's personal.
And all the top founders that I've spoken with, that's what it comes down. Whenever it's personal, it's you were going to give 110% no matter what. You'll give 150% because it's personal. It changes everything. Super interesting story. Loved having both of you on. We'll have to do this again in the near future, but thank you so much for joining me here today, and best of luck to both of you.
Thank you, Jared.
Thanks, Jared. It was great to be here.